Hello and welcome to DD India. I am Akshay Dongre and you're watching Voice of the Global South, a show that brings to you stories, news, achievements and concerns of a rising aspirational world. So let us take a look at this episode. The world's worst humanitarian crisis is taking place right now as we speak, and it's neither taking place in the Middle East nor in Ukraine. It's taking place in Africa, where Sudan is witnessing the world's worst humanitarian crisis. United Nations agencies say that around 10 million people have fled their homes since the army and paramilitary clashed over a year ago for power in the capital city of Khartoum. But this recent catastrophe has decades-old roots and hardly anyone is talking about it across the world. Here's a report on the tragedy that is unfolding in the northeast of Africa and the future of Sudan.
Graveyards in East Africa, Sudan are filling fast. Bodies of men, women and children are piling as food continues to remain a scarcity. The civil war between the Sudanese Armed Forces or SAF and the paramilitary Rapid Security Forces has plunged the country into chaos. According to projections by UN agencies and aid groups, an estimated of 756,000 people in Sudan could face catastrophic food shortages by September. 54% of the country's population is already facing critical shortages. The impending famine is a direct consequence of a clash that broke out in April 2023 in Sudan's capital city of Khartoum and Darfur region. The fighting forced millions to flee, triggering the world's largest displacement crisis.
Some 12 million have been forced to flee their homes in Sudan, with over 2 million crossing borders into neighboring countries, mainly Chad, South Sudan and Egypt, often arriving in extremely vulnerable conditions and highly traumatized.
The roots of this clash go decades back. The ethnic conflict stems primarily from long-standing tensions between the Arab-dominated north and the non-Arab African communities in the southwest. In 2003, the region of Darfur saw its first instance of violence. Rebels from the Sudan Liberation Army and the Justice and Equality Movement launched attack against the Sudanese government of Omar al-Bashir, accusing them of neglecting the Darfur region. The Sudanese government responded with a military campaign with allied Arab militias targeting non-Arab ethnic groups. Reports indicate over 1,000 villages were burned down. In 2004, 1 year into the conflict, the United Nations declared Darfur the world's worst humanitarian crisis. An estimated 1.2 million people were displaced, and tens of thousands were killed in the ensuing violence. In May of 2006, the Darfur Peace Agreement was signed between the Sudanese government and one faction of the SLA. However, other rebel groups rejected the deal. In 2007, the United Nations and African Union deployed a joint peacekeeping force to Darfur in an attempt to stabilize the region. The mission was one of the largest of its kind, with up to 26,000 personnel.
Let's be very clear. The civilians are the ones that have no responsibility, no fault of their own in this conflict, and yet, as so often happens, they are the ones paying the highest price.
Despite peacekeeping efforts, clashes continued, and an estimated 300,000 deaths were reported. In 2009, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. However, al-Bashir denied the charges. In 2010, another peace agreement was signed in Doha, but it failed to bring any substantial breakthrough in the crisis. In 2011, through a referendum, South Sudan seceded, with 99% of voters in favor of an independent country. The period from 2011 to 2018 saw fluctuating violence, and the civilians continued to struggle with basic necessities. In 2013, the Rapid Security Forces also came into being, originating from the Janjaweed militia, accused of ethnic cleansing against Darfur's non-Arabic population since 2003. In 2019, following mass protests, the Sudanese military, led by Defense Minister Awad ibn Auf, ousted President Omar al-Bashir, ending his 30-year-old rule. A transitional military council was established to govern for 2 years before elections. The government promised a commitment to peace in Darfur. In October 2020, Sudan's transitional government signed a peace agreement with several rebel groups, aiming to end conflicts in Darfur and other regions. However, communal violence and clashes continued in parts of Darfur, along with another coup in 2021 by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who took over as the head of the state. The clash intensified in April 2023 as the rival military factions, SAF under General al-Burhan and the RSF under the Janjaweed leader Hemedti, started fighting, which continues to the present day.
Sudan is the world's largest humanitarian crisis.
I can speak more about Sudan. I am very keen to single it out first because I think it is a crisis that, and this is not applying to you who report from here, so hear about that a lot, but generally doesn't really make it to the headline. Is a very forgotten crisis, although it's one of the most catastrophic ones, not just in terms of displacement, but in terms of hunger, lack of access, violation of human rights, and so forth.
As the war worsens, the civilians continue to suffer in alarming conditions, with a possible famine looming and a disguised genocide. There also seems a lack of persistent international attention as conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine and Haiti take center stage. The crisis calls for urgent action from the international community instead of being meek, passive observers, while countless innocents suffer and perish.
Now from Sudan to another crisis in Africa, where millions of people were out on the streets protesting against a bill passed in the Kenyan parliament. But what was so contentious in the finance bill in Kenya that triggered nationwide protests, that ultimately led to President Ruto taking a U-turn and reject the bill, which aimed at raising an additional $2.7 billion in taxes as part of government's efforts to lighten Kenya's heavy debt load. Now, even after rejecting the finance bill, why are protests still continuing in the African nation? Here's a report on the Kenyan crisis.
Having reflected on the continuing conversation around the content of the Finance Bill 2024 and listening keenly to the people of Kenya who have said loudly that they want nothing to do with this Finance Bill 2024, I concede, and therefore I will not sign the 2024 Finance Bill.
The Kenyan protests that initially started as an outcry on social media on 18th of June took physical form on 20th of June after hundreds of protesters took to streets against the contentious Finance Bill 2024. The protesting people were met tear gas, stun guns and multiple arrests by the Kenyan police amid the calls to occupy parliament, which ultimately led the young agitators to storm the parliament on 25th of June. The ensuing violence and clash with the police left at least 23 people dead and multiple injured. The backlash saw President William Ruto repealing the bill on 25th of June, conceding that the plan had caused widespread dissatisfaction. However, the move failed to quell the movement of the Kenyan youth.
The president thought by unleashing force he could quell the protests. Then he realized people were willing to die. People actually dying, and I've done some retreats actually. People who lost their loved ones last and said we're going to go back to the streets. Because they're already dead actually.
But why has the bill caused such a fierce stir in the African nation? The proposal was part of Ruto government's efforts to raise an extra $2.7 billion in domestic revenue through a tax hike to lighten the heavy debt load. At present, Kenya's public debt amounts to 68% of its gross domestic product, surpassing the advised limit of 55% by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. President Ruto, in his speech on Tuesday, assured the public of better measures.
I am directing for immediate further austerity measures to reduce expenditure, starting with the office of the president, the entire presidency, and extending to the entire executive arm of government. Operational expenditure in the presidency be reduced to remove allocations for the confidential fort, reduce travel, hospitality, purchase of motor vehicles, renovations, and other expenditures.
The 10 days of protest has created seemingly unbridgeable trust issues among the public.
The matter on how Ruto has taken the situation, this guy is very clever. Even though he has refused to sign the bill, definitely after 21 days, it will become a law, meaning we'll have to adopt unto it, and as the youth, we'll have nothing to do. Yeah, so what I will say to my fellow comrades, yeah, we are still going for this until we get what we want right.
As demands of President Ruto's resignation intensify, the bigger issue of economic woes of the Kenyan citizens remain. With an uneasy calm, it is unclear how the government plans to come out of this vicious debt cycle and aid their young population who stare at an uncertain future. This also points to a broader problem of similar debt traps in various other nations in the global south that have the potential to plunge nations into similar, if not worse, economic and political crisis.
We will take a small break here and be back with more stories on the other side. Keep watching.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries, and decode issues that matter to you. Watch Connecting the Dots with me at these times on DD India. Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
We just don't bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter.
We don't just present facts, we demystify complex social, political and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India and this is Voice of the Global South. Now let's take a look at the next stories. The crisis in Myanmar is rapidly worsening with the surge in military airstrikes and assaults by the junta, escalating over 300% in regions like Rakhine State. Since the military coup in February 2021, the country has been engulfed in a civil war between the armed forces of Myanmar and armed ethnic groups spread across the country. Thousands have fled, creating a refugee influx in neighboring nations. Border tensions are rising, impacting communities and businesses. Meanwhile, refugees face challenges in camps with limited resources. The situation remains critical and volatile as violence persists, prompting global concerns. Let's take a look.
The turmoil in Myanmar is deepening. In the last few months, airstrikes and ground assaults by its military junta have increased by over 300% in several regions, including the Rakhine states, against armed groups as well as civilians. A larger political, economic and humanitarian crisis is unfolding with distressing urgency. Since the military coup in February 2021, the Southeast Asian nation has been plunged into a civil war between its military and loosely organized ethnic groups. The UN too has sounded the alarm as the escalation of violence.
The Secretary General is deeply concerned by the increasing violence across Myanmar and strongly condemns the recent attacks by the Myanmar military that have reportedly killed scores of civilians, including in Rakhine and Sangeng regions. The latest incident targeting ethnic Rakhine in western Myanmar and the ongoing persecution of the Rohingya underlines the need for protection of all communities. Indiscriminate aerial bombings and human rights violations continue to be reported in many parts of Myanmar. Those responsible must be held to account.
The recent surge in violence in Myanmar has forced thousands to flee their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring countries. The United Nations reports that over 1.5 million people have been displaced internally within Myanmar and over 2 lakh have crossed borders into Thailand, Bangladesh and India. The influx of refugees is straining social and economic infrastructures. Cross-border tensions have increased, with reports of skirmishes between Myanmar's military and ethnic armed groups near its borders with India and Bangladesh. This is affecting locals and businesses near the border regions.
We can clearly see their warships. Also, their jets are often flying by in very close proximity. They keep shelling the other side. It is tense passing through the days here. We often jump out of the bed at night when they fight. We are anxious about whether this war may spread into our land.
Some 90,000 refugees are living in camps in Thailand with an ever-increasing influx, putting immense strain on its resources. Bangladesh, already struggling with the Rohingya crisis, now hosts an additional 4 lakh Myanmar nationals. India has taken in about 2 lakh refugees, mostly in its northeastern states. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar met with Myanmar's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister on Wednesday, expressing deep concern over the continuing violence in areas close to the country's border with India. He also called for an early return to the path of democratic transition in Myanmar. Over 18 million people are now in need of humanitarian assistance, a 19-fold increase from pre-coup levels. The response has been hampered by limited access and resources. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees reports that funding for refugee support is critically low, with only 35% of the required funds met. Disease outbreak and malnutrition are rampant in overcrowded camps.
The violence must end, the attacks against civilians must end, the forced conscription must end, and the denial of humanitarian assistance must end.
Globally, there have been calls for increased sanctions and diplomatic pressure on the Myanmar junta. The US and EU have imposed targeted sanctions, but their effectiveness is under debate as violence and displacement persist. As the world watches, the people of Myanmar and their neighbors continue to bear the brunt of their protracted crisis. International solidarity and sustained humanitarian aid remain critical to elevate suffering of the common people and restore stability in the region.
India and Bangladesh, two emerging economic powerhouses from South Asia, have further cemented their decades-old ties after a state visit by Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to India. The bilateral state visit was the first by a foreign leader after the inauguration of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's third term to the office and laid a groundwork for the neighbouring nations to enhance their ties and energize the India-Bangladesh relations.
Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was one of the many international leaders who attended Prime Minister Narendra Modi's oath-taking ceremony earlier in June. Prime Minister Hasina visited India for a bilateral visit later in the same month. As part of her visit, the Bangladesh's PM met various Indian leaders, including Indian President Draupadi Murmu, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and various members of his cabinet. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on June 22nd held extensive talks with his visiting Bangladeshi counterpart Sheikh Hasina to shore up cooperation in diverse areas including trade and connectivity. The two leaders decided to expand cooperation in several new areas and inked multiple agreements, including a pact to boost ties in the maritime sphere and blue economy. The key pacts signed by the two sides included one on forging strong ties in the digital domain and another on having a green partnership. The two sides also inked an agreement on railway connectivity.
Today, our two sides had very productive meetings where we discussed politics and security, trade and connectivity, the sharing of water from common rivers, power, energy, and regional and multilateral cooperation, among other issues of mutual interest. We agreed to collaborate with each other for the betterment of our people and countries. As Dhaka and Delhi have started new journeys, we charted the future course of action to ensure a smart Bangladesh by following the vision of 2041 and Viksit Bharat by 2047. Both countries endorsed the vision statement to guide us towards a peaceful and prosperous future. We agreed to have a shared vision for digital partnership and a green partnership for a sustainable future.
India and Bangladesh share historic relations that go back to the creation of Bangladesh. The recent visit by the Bangladesh's PM is in line with India's policy of neighborhood first. The relationship is not just bilateral, but multilateral as well. Both India and Bangladesh have been engaging in regional cooperation through multilateral forums such as SAARC or South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, BIMSTEC or Bay of Bengal Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, and IORA or the Indian Ocean Rim Association. As global politics goes through a churn and Indo-Pacific emerges as a center for power, this relationship in South Asia highlights India's credibility as both a regional and a global power which is trusted by its neighbors.
हमने काउंटर टेररिज्म, कट्टरवाद और बॉर्डर के शांतिपूर्ण प्रबंधन पर अपनी सहभागिता को मजबूत करने का निश्चय किया है। इंडियन ओशन क्षेत्र के लिए हमारी विजन समान है। इंडो पैसिफिक ओशन इनिशिएटिव्स में शामिल होने के लिए बांग्लादेश के निर्णय का हम स्वागत करते हैं। हम बिम्स्टेक सहित अन्य रीजनल और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय फोरम पर भी अपना सहयोग जारी रखेंगे।
The trailblazing women of Indonesian band Voice of Bassrot have created history at England Glastonbury Festival, making their mark as the first Indonesian group to perform at the renowned event. With their Islamic headscarves, socially conscious lyrics and electrifying metal music, VOB captivates audience worldwide. Despite challenges, all the band members are determined to challenge norms, empower women and inspire change through their powerful music. Let's take a look at this report.
Loud cheers, flashing lights and heavy metal screams echo as the women of the Indonesian band Voice of Baceprot light the stage on fire. The all-female trio consisting of Frida Marcia Kurnia, Vidi Rahmawati and US Siti Aisyah created history on Friday as they were the first Indonesian band to perform at the Glastonbury Festival in England. One of the world's biggest music festivals, the 5-day festival saw them sharing space with artists such as Coldplay, Shania Twain and Dua Lipa. For Voice of Baceprot, this is a big opportunity. Formed in 2014 in their hometown of Garut, VOB entered the Indonesian music scene with a seemingly contradictory image. Heavy metal style of music while they don a modest Islamic attire along with the hijab, dealing with the stigmas overseas and at home.
There was a time when if we were at a concert, there would be someone saying disturbingly Allahu Akbar and Kaboom. It was from the audience. So it was as if we were criminals and terrorists in their eyes.
In our village, metal is considered as satanic music, not suitable for women, especially women wearing hijabs like us.
Their love for metal brought them together in school after hearing American band System of Down. Since then, VOB have set out to challenge stereotypes about Muslim women and represent their love of both music and culture along with uplifting the community.
We'll create a community and form a movement there. And we can also create some small businesses for our fans who are jobless. We'd like to empower the community there.
VOB's music speaks of female empowerment and shunning a culture which puts looks above music. The band has built a loyal fan base of young Muslim hijabi women who look up to VOB as inspiration. This ever-increasing army of fans already brings VOB closer to their goal of strong, supportive, empowered community with music as their main tool.
That's it in this edition of Voice of the Global South. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The application is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code on the screen to download now. You can also connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. Also check out our website ddindia.co.in. From my entire team, goodbye and keep watching DD India.